The scarlet sun was setting on Copper Creek, a town that was once prosperous, but now lay forgotten on the plains of Arizona. The dirt streets echoed only with the wind and the occasional whinny of horses tied to worn-out wooden posts. It was 1885, and the law had abandoned this place a long time ago. A tall man rode down the main street on a black Mustang, his imposing figure a stark contrast to the desolation around him. His face remained hidden by a black leather mask that covered everything but his piercing blue eyes. A wide-brimmed hat completed the disguise, and a sheriff's star gleamed on the chest of his leather vest. "So you're the new sheriff," murmured Jake Morrison, the saloon owner, watching from his foggy window. "What kind of man hides behind a mask?" The mysterious rider dismounted in front of the sheriff's office, a small, deteriorated building that hadn't seen a lawman in 2 years. His spurs jingled against the floorboards as he walked, each step echoing like an omen. Inside the office, he found only dust, cobwebs, and a broken desk. On the walls, time-yellowed wadded posters danced in the breeze that came through the cracked windows. One name stood out in bold letters: Jackson Wilde reward, $5,000 dead or alive. The masked man instinctively touched a scar that ran along his jawline, hidden by the mask. His hands trembled for an instant before he clenched them into fists. "Welcome to Copper Creek, Sheriff," said a gruff voice behind him. It was Marcus Thornfield, the most powerful man in town, owner of the mines and controller of everything that happened there. Tall and elegant, he wore an expensive suit that contrasted with the local rusticity. "I hope you'll be more cooperative than your predecessor." The masked sheriff turned slowly, his intimidating presence filling the small space. "I'm here to enforce the law, Mr. Thornfield. All of it." Thornfield laughed, a humorless sound. "The law? My dear fellow, here I am the law. My men control the mines, the commerce, even who can or cannot stay in town. You would be wise to remember that. And you would be wise to remember that things are about to change." The sheriff replied, his voice filled with a chilling authority that made Thornfield take a step back. On that first night, sitting alone in the office by the light of a flickering lantern, the masked man opened a secret drawer in his saddle. From inside, he pulled out a faded photograph. A happy family, a man, a woman, and a small girl smiling under the Arizona sun. His fingers gently traced the faces in the image. "Sarah, Emily," he murmured, his voice breaking slightly. "I promised I'd get justice. I promised everyone who did this to you would pay." The mask hid not only his identity, but also the tears that silently ran down his face, which was marked by pain. Jackson Wilde had been dead to the world for 3 years since the night he lost everything. But the man who remained had a singular purpose: to dismantle the corruption that destroyed his family, even if it cost him his own soul. Outside, coyotes howled in the distance, as if they sensed that a bloody change was coming to Copper Creek. The faceless sheriff cleaned his guns, checked his bullets, and prepared for the war that was about to begin. Revenge had arrived in town, wearing a star and hiding behind a mask. 3 days after the masked sheriff's arrival, Copper Creek was already buzzing with tension. The mysterious man wasted no time in making his presence felt, patrolling the streets with a determination that hadn't been seen in those arid lands for a long time. "He arrested 2 of my men yesterday," Thornfield grumbled to his right-hand man, Bull Mackenzie, a corpulent man with scars that told violent stories. They were in Thornfield's luxurious office, located above the bank he also controlled. He said they were disturbing the peace when they were just collecting debts. Bull chewed on a toothpick, his small, piggy eyes gleaming with malice. "Want me to handle it, boss? Maybe a drinking accident?" "Not yet." Thornfield drummed his fingers on the imported mahogany desk. "This sheriff is different. There's something about him ... something dangerous. I need to know who he is before I act." Meanwhile, on the other side of town, the sheriff was walking down the main street when a young woman hesitantly approached him. It was Elena Rodriguez, the daughter of one of the Mexican miners, around 25 years old, with brown eyes full of hope and fear. "Sheriff," she whispered in accented English, looking nervously around. "Please, I need to talk to you. It's about my father, Miguel." The masked man stopped, his full attention on her. "What happened to your father, Senorita Rodriguez?" He discovered something in the mines. Something Mr. Thornfield didn't want anyone to know about. Now he's been missing for a week. Tears welled up in her eyes. The other miners say he left, but I know that's not true. He would never leave me. The sheriff felt a familiar pang of pain. The image of his own daughter, Emily, flashed in his mind. Tell me everything you know. Elena looked around one more time before continuing. Papa said he found old tunnels connected to the mines full of bones, human bones, and old documents hidden in metal boxes. He was scared. He said he was going to tell the authorities in Phoenix. And you believe Thornfield found out? I'm sure of it. The night before Papa disappeared, Bull Mackenzie and his men were at our house asking questions. They said Papa was spreading dangerous lies. The sheriff placed a reassuring hand on the young woman's shoulder. I'll find your father, Elena. You have my word. Later that night, the masked sheriff rode to the abandoned mines on the outskirts of town. The full moon illuminated the deteriorated wooden structures and the rusty tracks that had once carried fortune and dreams. Infiltrating silently, he discovered that the mines weren't as abandoned as they seemed. Armed guards patrolled the main entrance, and faint lights emanated from the depths. Using a forgotten side entrance, the sheriff descended into the dark tunnels. What he found shocked him, not only the bones Elena had mentioned, but evidence of a much larger criminal operation. Documents showed that Thornfield had been siphoning gold from the federal government for years, using Mexican workers as what was practically slave labor. But there was more. In a hidden chamber, he found Miguel Rodriguez, alive but severely wounded, chained to a rock wall. Water ... Miguel murmured weakly when he saw the masked figure approach. I'm the sheriff, the man said, beginning to break the chains. Elena sent me. Sheriff? Miguel opened his eyes with effort. No ... You can't trust anyone here. Tornfield ... He killed the previous sheriff when he started asking questions. And there's something else ... What? He was looking for someone. Someone named Jackson Wilde. Said if that man ever showed up in town, he'd be killed on the spot. The masked sheriff's blood ran cold. Thornfield knew he was still alive. Does he know something about you? Miguel asked, noticing the sudden tension in the sheriff's body. No, the sheriff lied, finishing the work of freeing the miner. But let's get out of here before they discover you're gone. As he helped Miguel walk through the dark tunnels, the masked sheriff realized his mission had become much more dangerous. Thornfield wasn't just a common criminal. He was the man who had ordered the death of his family 3 years ago, when Jackson Wilde was just an honest farmer who had witnessed something he shouldn't have. The mask that hid his face now seemed heavier, burdened not only with the weight of the disguise, but with the closeness of his revenge. Copper Creek was about to discover that some ghosts of the past come back not to haunt, but to collect. Miguel Rodriguez's rescue did not go unnoticed. The next morning, Bull Mackenzie found the broken chains in the tunnels and immediately reported it to Thornfield, who exploded in a rage in his private bank office. What do you mean he escaped? Thornfield slammed his fist on the desk, making inkwells jump. You are completely incompetent. Boss, there were tool marks on the metal. Someone freed him, Bull explained, nervously. And there's more. We found this near the chains. He held out a torn piece of black leather. Thornfield examined the fragment, and his eyes narrowed dangerously. From the sheriff's mask, he stood up and walked to the window, watching the masked man patrol the main street. Interesting. Very interesting. That afternoon, the sheriff was helping Elena tend to her father's wounds when a young Mexican boy ran up to the small adobe house. Sheriff! Sheriff! The 10-year-old boy shouted. Mr. Thornfield's men are burning the Martinez family's house. They say they were helping Miguel spread lies. The sheriff immediately stood up, checking his guns. Elena, keep your father hidden. Don't leave the house until I get back. He rode furiously to the outskirts of town, where he found a scene that made his blood boil. The modest Martinez home was in flames, and Bull Mackenzie was holding old man Martinez by the arms, while other men threatened his wife and small children. Let him go, now. The sheriff's voice cut through the air like a blade. His hand resting on the handle of his Colt .45. Bull laughed loudly. Or what, Sheriff? You'll arrest us too? This family was conspiring against Mr. Thornfield's legitimate interests. The only thing illegal here is you. Let that family go, or face the consequences. How about no? Bull violently released Martinez, causing the old man to fall. In fact, how about you take off that ridiculous mask and show us who you really are? The boss is very curious. The sheriff dismounted slowly, his spurs echoing against the stony ground. I won't repeat myself. The tension in the air was palpable as Bull and his 3 men spread out in formation, hands hovering over their guns. The sheriff remained motionless, calculating angles and distances with the precision of an experienced predator. Now, Bull shouted. What happened next lasted only seconds, but it felt like an eternity. The sheriff moved like a ghost, his gun appearing from the holster with a speed that defied the human eye. 4 shots echoed almost simultaneously. 3 of Bull's men fell wounded in the arms or legs, disarmed but alive. Bull, however, had been faster than the others and managed to fire. The bullet hit the side of the sheriff's mask, tearing the leather and revealing part of his face, specifically a deep scar that ran from his ear to his chin. Bull's eyes widened, his gun shaking in his hand. That scar. It can't be. You're dead. Thornfield said you died in the fire with your family. The sheriff touched the exposed side of his face, feeling the cool air on skin hadn't seen the light of day in 3 years. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from a burning rage that had been bottled up for too long. Jackson Wilde died that night, he said, his voice filled with an ancient pain. But the dead sometimes return to settle accounts. Bull tried to retreat but stumbled and fell. Thornfield said you had died in your farm's fire. He said your wife and daughter. Shut up. The sheriff's scream echoed across the plains, scaring even the horses. You were there that night. I recognize your voice. You held my Sarah while those monsters. The memories came back like an avalanche. The farm in flames, Sarah's desperate screams, little Emily's cries, and himself being beaten almost to death before he managed to escape. Thornfield had burned his family alive because Jackson had witnessed a murder in the mines, the old sheriff being executed for asking too many questions. Double quotes. Did they suffer? Jackson asked, his voice breaking. Bull, realizing he was about to die, tried one last gambit. Thornfield has more men coming from Phoenix tomorrow. 12 of them. You can't win this war alone, Wilde. Jackson rearranged his partially destroyed mask, but his scarred face remained partially visible. Then let them come. I already died once. I have nothing left to lose. He helped the Martinez family to their feet, checking to see if they were injured. The house still burned behind them, the flames dancing like demons against the evening sky. Sheriff. Old man Martinez held his arm. Thank you. But that man is right. You can't face Thornfield alone. Jackson looked at the flames, seeing not the Martinez house but his own farm 3 years ago. Maybe not. But sometimes a man has to do what's right, even if it kills him. As he rode back to town under the Arizona stars, Jackson Wilde knew that the game had completely changed. His identity was compromised. Thornfield knew he was still alive, and a war was about to break out in Copper Creek. The torn mask in the night wind seemed to symbolize that there was no turning back. The vengeance he sought was within reach, but the price would be higher than he had ever imagined. News of the sheriff's true identity spread through Copper Creek like fire on dry straw. Jackson Wilde, the farmer everyone believed to be dead, was alive and wearing a sheriff's star to seek revenge. The town was divided. Some saw him as a vengeful ghost, others as their last hope for liberation. Jackson stayed up all night in his office, contemplating the torn mask on the table. For the first time in 3 years, part of his face had been exposed to the light of day, and it left him vulnerable in ways he never imagined. I can't hide anymore, he murmured to himself, tracing the exposed scar with his fingers. Sarah, Emily, would you forgive me for the man I've become? A soft knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. Elena Rodriguez entered cautiously, carrying a tray with coffee and homemade bread. I thought you might be hungry, Sheriff. Or should I say, Mr. Wilde? Jackson looked at her with tired eyes. I'm not Jackson Wilde anymore. That man died 3 years ago, and I don't know if I can still be called a sheriff. Elena sat in the opposite chair, her gentle eyes fixed on him. My father told me about your family. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you. Jackson's voice was hoarse with emotion. But condolences won't bring Sarah and Emily back. Only justice can do that. Justice or vengeance? Elena asked softly. There's a difference between them, you know. The question hit Jackson like a punch. He had spent 3 years feeding his thirst for revenge, planning every move, every confrontation. But now, sitting in that dusty office with a young woman who reminded him of his own daughter, he began to question his motivations. I don't know anymore, he finally admitted. It started as justice. Thornfield killed my family because I witnessed his crimes, but somewhere along the way, it became something darker. Elena poured the coffee, the hot steam rising like incense between them. Papa always said the difference between justice and vengeance is simple. Justice protects the innocent. Vengeance only feeds the pain. Before Jackson could respond, the door was thrown open. Jake Morrison, the saloon owner, rushed in, followed by other men from town, the blacksmith Tom Anderson, the local Dr. Hayes, and surprisingly, even some of the Mexican miners. "Wilde," Jake said, taking off his hat. "We heard about what happened yesterday, and about who you really are." Jackson tensed, his hand instinctively moving toward his gun. And we want to help," declared Tom Anderson, a large man with hands calloused from ironwork. "Thornfield has been bleeding us dry for years. Impossible fees, threats, violence. It's time someone did something about it." Dr. Hayes, an elderly man with white hair, stepped forward. "I was here when your family died, Jackson. I saw the bodies. I should have spoken up. I should have done something. Forgive me for my cowardice." Jackson felt a lump in his throat. "Doctor." "No." The doctor raised a hand. "Let me finish. Thornfield threatened to kill my granddaughter if I said anything about how Sarah and Emily really died. But now I see that my silence only allowed more families to suffer." One of the Mexican miners, Carlos Mendez, spoke with a heavy accent. "Our children cannot grow up in fear. If you are going to face Thornfield, we will go with you." Jackson looked around the room, seeing determined faces where before there had only been fear and resignation. For the first time since his family's death, he didn't feel completely alone. "Thornfield has a dozen gunmen coming from Phoenix," he said. "This won't just be a confrontation. It will be a war. Some of you might die. And if we do nothing, we will all die slowly," Jake replied. "At least this way, our children will have a chance to grow up free." Jackson stood up and walked to the window, watching the distant mountains where the sun was beginning to rise. On the mountains, Sarah always said, God painted his best pictures. "There's one condition," he finally said, turning to the group. "We do this the right way. We are not murderers or vigilantes. We are citizens defending our town against criminals. Thornfield and his men will have a chance to surrender." Elena smiled softly. "That's justice talking, not vengeance." Jackson nodded, feeling a fundamental shift in his heart. Sarah always said a man is defined not by his pain, but by how he chooses to deal with it. He looked at each person in the room. "All right, if you're willing to stand, then we'll plan this right." They spent the rest of the morning developing a strategy. Tom Anderson would build barricades. Dr. Hayes would prepare a makeshift hospital. The miners knew tunnels that could be used for movement, and Jake would coordinate communication between the groups. As the sun set on Copper Creek that day, Jackson Wilde was no longer just a man driven by vengeance. He had transformed into what he was truly meant to be, a protector of his community, a leader who inspired others to be brave. But he knew the transformation would be tested the next day, when Thornfield and his gunmen arrived for the final confrontation. The torn mask on his desk reminded him that there was no turning back, only moving forward, toward justice or death. The dawn of the next day brought with it a tension that could be cut with a knife. Jackson Wilde was on the porch of the sheriff's office, watching the dusty road that led to Copper Creek. His mask had been repaired overnight by Elena, but he decided to leave part of his face uncovered. It was time to face his demons without completely hiding. "They're coming," Tom Anderson murmured, pointing to a cloud of dust on the horizon. 13 riders approached the town in a military formation, their weapons glinting under the morning Arizona sun. Jackson checked his guns one last time. 2 Colt 45s in his holsters, and a Winchester rifle propped against the wall. "Remember the plan. No one shoots until I give the signal. We want to give them a chance to surrender." The townspeople had positioned themselves strategically. Jake Morrison in the saloon with a shotgun, Tom Anderson at the forge with tools that could serve as weapons, Dr. Hayes at his office prepared for the wounded, and the Mexican miners on the roofs with borrowed rifles. Thornfield rode at the front of the group, wearing a black suit as if for a funeral. Perhaps it was. By his side was Bull McKenzie, his arm in a sling from the previous day's injury, and a collection of the most dangerous gunman money could buy. They stopped in the middle of the main street, just 50 yards from the sheriff's office. The silence was deafening, broken only by the wind that made saloon doors creak and American flags flutter on the posts. Jackson Wilde, Thornfield shouted, his voice echoing between the buildings. Or should I say our fake sheriff? Come out and face me like a man. Jackson took a deep breath and walked down the wooden steps, his spurs echoing like a funeral bell. He stopped in the middle of the street, alone but not really alone. He could feel the eyes of the entire town on him. Thornfield, Jackson said, his voice carrying 3 years of pent-up pain. You killed my wife and daughter. You destroyed this town. The time has come to pay for your crimes. Thornfield laughed, a cold sound that cut through the morning air. My crimes? I brought prosperity to Copper Creek. I created jobs. And your family? He paused theatrically. They were necessary casualties in a bigger war. War? Jackson felt the rage rise like lava in his veins. What war justifies burning a woman and a child alive? The war for progress, Thornfield yelled, dismounting from his horse. You were just an ignorant farmer who saw something you shouldn't have. When you refused to stay quiet about the old sheriff, you sealed your family's fate. And now, Jackson said, his hands hovering over his guns, you've sealed your own fate. The tension reached the breaking point. Bull Mackenzie, even wounded, was the first to draw his gun, but Jackson was faster. Jackson's shot hit Bull in the chest, dropping him instantly. Now, Jackson shouted. The town exploded in violence. Shots echoed from all directions as the citizens of Copper Creek fought for their homes. Jake Morrison took down 2 gunmen from the saloon window, while Tom Anderson used his blacksmith's hammer to disarm another. Jackson moved like a vengeful ghost, his guns thundering as he advanced toward Thornfield. 3 gunmen fell to his precise shots, but others regrouped and began to encircle his position. Elena, get out of there! Jackson shouted when he saw the young woman running to help a wounded miner in the middle of the shootout. A bullet whizzed dangerously close to Elena's head. Jackson threw himself in front of her, feeling a bullet tear through his shoulder. The pain was intense, but he continued shooting, protecting the young woman until she could take cover. You can't save them all, Wilde, shouted Thornfield, who had hidden behind a wagon. Just like you couldn't save your pathetic wife and your little crying daughter. Something broke inside Jackson. The image of Emily in flames flashed before his eyes, and he stood up with a roar of pure pain and rage. Her last words were asking for you, Papa. Thornfield continued with calculated cruelty. She screamed your name as the flames ... Jackson charged like a demon, ignoring the bullets that whizzed around him. Thornfield realized too late that he had gone too far. He drew his ornate gun, but Jackson was faster. Jackson's first shot hit Thornfield's hand, making his gun fly. The second hit his leg, bringing him down. Jackson stood over the man who had destroyed his life, his gun pointed directly at the criminal's heart. Please ... Thornfield pleaded, all his air of superiority evaporated. I have money. I can pay ... You can't pay for what you did, Jackson said, his voice as cold as the desert wind. But I'm also not going to become the monster you are. Instead of shooting, Jackson grabbed Thornfield by the collar and dragged him to the middle of the street where everyone could see. Citizens of Copper Creek, Jackson yelled, this man has publicly confessed to the murder of my family and the corruption of this town. Justice will be done, but the right way. The shooting had ceased. The surviving gunmen surrendered when they realized they were outnumbered and that their boss had been captured. Thornfield looked around, seeing the determined faces of the citizens he had oppressed for years. You ... You can't do this to me. I am an important man. You were, Jackson corrected. Now you're just a criminal waiting for trial. As the last echoes of the shots faded over Copper Creek, Jackson Wilde knew that the vengeance he had sought for 3 years was finally within reach. But more importantly, so was justice. 2 weeks after the showdown that would forever change Copper Creek, the town was buzzing with an energy it hadn't felt in years. The streets were being cleaned, new businesses were opening, and for the first time in a long time, children ran free in the streets without fear. Jackson Wilde was sitting in his sheriff's office, now officially recognized by the territorial authorities who had arrived from Phoenix. On his desk was a telegram from the Arizona Territory governor, offering him a permanent position as sheriff and praising his courage in cleaning up Copper Creek's corruption. The door opened and Elena Rodriguez entered, carrying a cup of coffee and a small package. How are you feeling today, Sheriff? She asked, noting that he had completely abandoned the mask. His scarred face was now exposed to the world, and he seemed to have found peace with his appearance. Empty, Jackson answered honestly, accepting the coffee. I spent 3 years living only for this moment, and now, I don't know what to do with myself. Elena sat down, pushing the small package toward him. Papa and I made this for you. Jackson carefully unwrapped the gift, revealing a framed photograph. It was the original image of his family, Sarah and Emily, but now restored and enlarged by a photographer from Phoenix. His wife and daughter smiled back at him, eternally happy and at peace. Double quotes. Elena, double quotes, his voice failed him. You spent so long carrying the guilt and the pain that you forgot to carry the love, she said gently. They wouldn't want to see you defined only by the tragedy. At that moment, Jake Morrison knocked on the door and entered. Sheriff, the judge arrived from Phoenix. It's time. Marcus Thornfield's trial was held in Jake's saloon, temporarily transformed into a courtroom. Judge Harrison, a severe gray-haired man, presided over the proceedings with the dignity that justice deserved. Thornfield, now wearing simple prisoner's clothes, looked like a shadow of the powerful man he once was. His wounds had healed, but his spirit was broken. Marcus Thornfield, the judge said, you have been found guilty of first-degree murder, conspiracy, extortion, and a series of other crimes against the citizens of this territory. Jackson watched from his position at the back of the room. He didn't feel the satisfaction he expected, just an empty feeling that justice, while done, could not bring back what he had lost. However, the judge continued, due to the testimony of several victims asking for clemency, and considering your cooperation in revealing other crimes and accomplices, this court sentences you to life in prison instead of death. Thornfield lowered his head. It was Elena who had led the petition for clemency, arguing that more death would not honor the memory of the victims. After the trial, Jackson walked alone to the cemetery on the outskirts of town. 2 simple wooden headstones marked the graves of Sarah and Emily Wilde. He had finally been able to give them a proper burial with the remains recovered from the ruins of his farm. I did it, my love, he whispered, kneeling before the headstones. Thornfield will pay for what he did. The town is safe. Tears ran down his scarred face. But you're still gone, and I'm still here, not knowing how to move forward. The wind blew gently through the pine trees, carrying the scent of the wildflowers that Sarah loved so much. For a moment, Jackson could almost feel her presence here, her voice saying she was proud of him. Elena approached silently, respecting his moment of grief before speaking. What are you going to do now, Jackson? He stood up, wiping away the tears. I don't know. The governor wants me to stay on as sheriff. The town needs stability, but you're not sure if you can stay in a place with so many memories? Exactly. He looked at the distant mountains. Part of me wants to ride into the sunset and never look back. Start fresh somewhere Jackson Wilde never existed. And the other part? Jackson smiled sadly. The other part knows Sarah would be furious if I abandoned all these good people who risked their lives to help me. They walked back to town in quiet contemplation. The streets were lively with preparations for a celebration festival. The first time Copper Creek would have a party in years. You know, Elena said as they watched the children playing, Papa always says that sometimes God gives us new families when we lose our old ones. Not to replace the lost love, but to give us reasons to keep loving. Jackson looked around, seeing Jake Morrison repairing his saloon sign, Tom Anderson teaching his son how to shoe horses, Dr. Hayes tending to patients with a smile on his face. These people had become his makeshift family, united by adversity and strengthened by victory. Maybe you're right, he said. Maybe it's time to stop living in the past and start building a future. That night, as Copper Creek celebrated its freedom, Jackson Wilde made his decision. He would remain as sheriff, not for vengeance or guilt, but because he had found a new purpose, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves, to be the law in places where the law had been forgotten. It was a bittersweet ending. He had achieved justice for his family, but the price was realizing that vengeance could never fill the void in his heart. Only love and service to others could do that. The mask had finally fallen, revealing not only his face, but his soul. 5 years later, the autumn of 1890 brought golden colors to the mountains surrounding Copper Creek, now a prosperous town that attracted families and merchants from all over the Arizona territory. The old corrupt town had transformed into an example of how a community could rebuild when good people came together for a just cause. Jackson Wilde, now 42, rode down the main street on his morning rounds. His hair had gray strands at the temples, and the scars on his face had become less pronounced with time. But his blue eyes held the same determination that had once brought him to town as a masked man in search of revenge. The sheriff's star on his chest shone in the morning sun, polished with the pride of someone who had found his true calling. He was no longer the Jackson Wilde who had lost everything, nor the vengeful ghost who had arrived in Copper Creek. He was something new, a protector, a leader, a man who had transformed his pain into purpose. "Good morning, Sheriff," shouted little Maria Mendez, daughter of Carlos, the miner who had become the new foreman of the now cooperative town mines. The 8-year-old girl was running down the street with other children, playing sheriff and outlaws, always casting Jackson as the hero. "Good morning, Senorita Maria," Jackson replied, tipping the brim of his hat. "Be careful not to knock over Mrs. Patterson with all that running." The children laughed and ran toward the school, a new building constructed with the funds recovered from Thornfield's illegal operations. Jackson smiled, remembering how Emily loved to run like that. Full of life and joy, he stopped in front of the sheriff's office, now renovated and expanded, where he found Elena Rodriguez, now Elena Wilde, organizing papers on the desk. They had married the previous year, a union that surprised some but made perfect sense to those who knew them well. "Miguel brought reports from the mines," she said, getting up to kiss her husband. "Record production this month, and all the workers received their share of the profits." Jackson nodded, examining the documents. The Copper Creek mines now operated as a cooperative, with the workers being partners instead of exploited employees. It was a revolutionary model that was attracting attention from all over the territory. And this letter arrived from Phoenix. Elena handed him an official envelope from the new governor. Jackson opened the letter and read it silently. His face remained impassive, but Elena noticed a slight tension in his shoulders. "What is it?" she asked. "They want me to consider running for territorial sheriff. I'd be responsible for enforcing the law throughout all of Arizona once it becomes a state." Elena watched him carefully. "And what do you want to do?" Jackson walked to the window, watching the town he had helped save. 5 years ago, I would have accepted immediately. More power, more influence, more ability to deliver justice. He stopped. "But now I realize that sometimes the greatest impact we can have is right here, where we are." That afternoon, Jackson rode alone to the cemetery, as he did every Friday. The wooden headstones of Sarah and Emily had been replaced with elegant marble stones, with fresh flowers always present, thanks to Elena's care. "Hi, my love," he said, kneeling before Sarah's headstone. "Hi, princess," he said to Emily. "I have news." He told them about the governor's letter, about the town's successes, about how Elena was teaching the Mexican children to read in both English and Spanish. He talked about everything, as he always did, keeping his family alive in his heart through his words. "You know, Sarah," he said finally, "it took me a long time to understand the difference between justice and vengeance. Vengeance would have been killing Thornfield that day. Justice was giving him the chance to live with the consequences of his actions." He gently touched the cold stone. "He's still in the territorial prison, working in the laundry. They say he found religion." Soft wind rustled the flowers, and Jackson smiled. "Elena asked me if I forgave Thornfield. I don't know if I've forgiven him, but I know I don't carry the hatred anymore. The hatred almost destroyed me. It almost turned me into the monster I was hunting." As the sun set on the Arizona mountains, painting the sky with the shades of gold and red that Sarah always loved, Jackson stood up. "I'm going to decline the governor's offer," he said. "My place is here, protecting this community, being the man you would have been proud to call your husband and father." He mounted his horse and began to ride back to town, where Elena was waiting for him with a warm dinner and plans for the future. For the first time in 5 years, Jackson Wilde was not running from his past or being consumed by it. He was building upon it. The mask that once hid his face had become unnecessary, not because his scars had disappeared, but because he had learned that true healing comes when we stop hiding from who we really are. Copper Creek prospered under his protection, became a symbol of hope in the American West, and Jackson Wilde found his peace, not in the vengeance he once sought, but in the love he chose to cultivate and the justice he decided to serve. Some stories end with the hero riding into the sunset. This one ends with him riding home, where he belonged, carrying the lessons he had so painfully learned, that sometimes the greatest revenge against darkness is to choose to live in the light.